How long did it take you to get back?
What do you mean
So
back?
you started playing the game. You gave them hints into the fact that you had insight. You took the drugs. You complied.
Well, remember, Centennial Peaks discharged me financially into the FACT team. And the FACT team's justification was, you know, I'd spent the day on RTC. Centennial Peaks was trying to fund putting me in an RTC. And my mom went to social services, and it's great too, I've got the release. She actually only allowed them to speak to Centennial Peaks verbally. She wouldn't allow them to have the records. But somehow, despite that fact, and she wouldn't let them speak to the county attorney's office at all, despite the fact that on the release it was like social services / county attorney, it was one line, she actually lined out county attorney. Like, she was worried that if too much information got to the FACT team, they might actually take me seriously, so she limited that. But they still picked me up at the hospital, and they still considered me someone who was at extreme risk of being placed in a long-term hospital. And so they thought they were saving my future. They thought they were saving me from a lifetime in a locked facility. They thought Dan Shearer thought he was doing a good thing.
But what happened?
They described their role in my life as a wielder of 2x4s, or baseball bats, metaphorically speaking. Their role was to keep me in treatment and keep the family together and safe in the home. But of course, I was the client, I was the crazy one. So they attempted to accomplish this by modifying me. And you know, I haven't talked too much about this area of time before, because even as of the last time I gave one of these public things, I wasn't ready. It was a Voices of Hope and Recovery CD for the National Coalition, but I actually really glossed over that whole period of time. But after I got out of Centennial Peaks, while I was dealing with the FACT team, these people were in my home. Nothing Centennial Peaks did had that much to do with my mother after she had me deposited there. And yeah, the people at Centennial Peaks would be like, well, the police wouldn't have brought you here if you didn't need to be here or whatever. They pass the buck. They always pass the buck, because they don't want to be responsible for it. But it was me and them. And they were, you know, the orderlies, whatnot. But they at least had their rules, they had their limits, they had all of that. None of that was true with my mother. When I was at home, it was a different set of rules with people who were actually worse than orderlies and not so well regulated, that being my mother. So it was a bad situation. And I again told Dan that he was being actively lied to by my mother, and that my mother was doing everything in her power to produce symptoms in me, by whatever means she could. That included, one of her favorite things, of course, was if we were in a meeting, she'd just, you know, talk about me in the third person, say things that weren't true, that would get me started. And then she'd start to bring up things that she knew were traumatic for me, which would make me emotional. And by the time I was finished, no one would believe a word I said. Because here was a kid having a trauma reaction, and what they saw was a psychotic. They saw paranoid. And I'm not sure if they ever really decided what they thought I had, because they thought I was paranoid and also bipolar, and that doesn't go together so well. But, you know, I really wasn't troubled by that little detail at the time, because, you know, it was the whole schizoaffective thing before. I figured they just thought I was paranoid. But they don't support it so well in their notes. It's hard to say. I'm sorry, I got into something and then completely lost where we were going. This is hard to talk about.
No, I imagine it is hard to talk about. Trying to get to once you got out.
Oh yes. Oh, getting away. Getting away is a lot harder. See, that's the thing. I was in the FACT team services starting when I was discharged, when I was 14, in January of 1999. And I was in the FACT team services through September of 2001. So we're talking about 2.5 years. And I was hospitalized once at Cleo Wallace during that time. Cleo Wallace is probably the worst of Denver's mental hospitals. That was just me being bitter, but it's also true. I heard horror stories about the children's adolescent unit, but I never saw it myself. We all traded horror stories, of course. It was unallowed. War stories were absolutely forbidden, but, you know, If I were a power-hungry asshole, I'd try and prevent people from developing a cognizance of themselves as oppressed too. That's what the back room is for. Getting out. Getting out was a mess and an accident. For 2.5 years I was in these people's power. But I was still incredibly... I mean, I didn't fight back actively. I didn't resist. But, let's see if I can find the proper page. Why is that oriented that way? Let's see if I can come up with one of these good examples. I would have had them ready if I had thought to. Continues. Da-da-da. Here we go. January 23rd, 2001. Client was seen once this month. He continues to be on med clinic status. Client has been able to maintain compliance towards his medication, despite protesting to continue taking them. He still sees no need to take his meds, save for Dr. Eliopoulos, client's psychiatrist, as being paranoid. And, you know, and another point, they're like, let's see...
What did they tell you about the drugs when they first started having you take them? Did you ask what they were? Did you just... What was the process of that?
Well, the lithium wasn't, you know, when they first had me take them, you mean BCMH or you mean originally?
No, originally, when you first started. Do you remember even?
Yes, I do. Let me find this one page, though, because it's really good. Somewhere in here, I guess I may not be immediately finding it, but somewhere there's a note from Dan where he talks about how I was able to negotiate reducing my medications, and that is pretty much how I handled that, because I knew better than to fuck with these people. They were very clear about their capabilities. I mean, I guess there was that line, and then somewhere there's just the remarks. So all throughout my charts, there is me stating that I don't want to be on these medications, and acknowledging that I'm not really in a position of choice, and then turning around, and where what I would have done previously was pretty much just tell them to go fuck themselves, I was actually negotiating the doses down, effectively, and yet somehow they still thought I was crazy. So, I don't know, I can't find the other note, but it's in here somewhere. Miranda. Oh my, some of these are old. You can tell me if you want me to stop looking through these, but I really want to find the note.
I was thinking maybe if we could take a break, you might be able to look through it, and then we could just grab a drink and smoke, and come back to it.
No objection.
All right, we can do that. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's right.
We're all set. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I worked out the whole story of discontinuing the medication over the objections of the fact team, but which was probably not the wisest choice I ever made, but at the same time it was a good one.
Why not the wisest?
Well,
it'll lay it out. Okay.
Let me, because it seemed, I mean, I know you guys really want to know about the fact team stuff, of course, but I think there were a couple of points I wanted to touch on before we got into that whole mess. You know, because I had been thinking about the question, for instance, of, well, what was I thinking? Was I thinking that, you know, I was just getting screwed and that I wasn't nuts? Was I thinking that it was crazy? You know, what is this? What was it that I was resisting, I guess, is what I was trying to figure out how to communicate. And in many ways, you know, there is the whole issue of the Munchausens, but as I disclosed, there was also more that happened when I was younger that could have been caused or could have been just natural and accidental. It's very difficult to answer those questions 20 years after the fact. And there are various hypotheses which could explain it. There's the hypothesis that I really had a biological psychotic disorder. There is the hypothesis that I experienced hallucinatory and psychotic phenomena. I mean, my charts also note frequent derailment and blocking, whatever that means. But, you know, it's possible that that was caused by a known effect of the Ritalin. It's possible that that was somehow caused by an attention-seeking parent. It's possible that it was natural and real. I believed that it was natural and real most of the time I was growing up, and I have only been really inclined to doubt that these past few years. I've even, you know, gone public and not been interested in attacking the question of whether it was real or not. I never thought I could win on that issue, and I've never been fully satisfied for 100% sure that, you know, I was just an innocent bystander who got swept into this because of some of those early things. But what that meant when I was 14, of course, and, you know, they were all telling me that what was happening to me was right and proper because I was fundamentally damaged in the brain, that I had a biological brain problem. And they emphasized that quite a bit. That's what the drugs were for. I think even with what they... And I'm just going to go ahead and allege this. Dan Shearer was well aware of my mother's Munchausen's by proxy while he was a part of the fact team that were treating me over my vocal objection when I had given no consent and had made clear that there was no consent present. So, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but for a long time, when I was growing up, I thought I was nuts. And I meant to be the first person in history, if that's what it took, to be off of medication and successful. Because I was told it had never been done and it couldn't be done. So my choices were to accept that and acknowledge that I would be on drugs forever. I think I may have been sidetracked and not quite answered the question of what it was like to first be on neuroleptics earlier as well, because I was in something else. So I wanted to sort of describe that experience because it sort of tells you what I was thinking when I was 14. I first was on neuroleptics at 8 years old. I was put on Stelazine. So here I was, an 8-year-old kid on, you know, a fairly serious, typical antipsychotic drug that sucks. And I knew immediately I didn't want to be on this drug. It's horribly unpleasant. Attempting to find the words for this has always challenged me. Well, it's hardly surprising that it's indescribable given what the drugs do to your brain, but, I mean, you lose a part of yourself. You lose the real-time experience of being in the moment, and you're dull, and there's something between you and the world, and it's impassable, and it's thick, and it's all about you, but it's inside. And I mean, the way these things alter your thought process is something I don't think the people who prescribe them really realize. I mean, on the one hand, they'd be like, well, of course they alter your thought process. They're medication for your thought process. Well, I don't see the point. I don't see the problem. But on the other hand, you know, most prescribing doctors have never taken these drugs. They don't understand the subjective experience. And there are people who would be inclined to say, well, maybe it's the efficacy and people don't like it because, you know, they just don't get what's happening to them or how it's helping them. But no. Whatever it might do for you, and I'm not interested in denying anybody's reality who chooses to take these medication, because I was on this medication for 8 years, and anyone who is willing to take this medication voluntarily because they feel it is necessary has made a choice that should simply be respected for how profoundly difficult that choice has to have been. And I have no interest in attacking that, but, you know, likewise I would prefer you, you know, not trying to attack me with the drugs. So, when I was 14, I believed I was nuts, and while my mother was lying, and the exact events and the exact situation which had given them the authority to have me in the hospital was bullshit, of course, they thought that they could keep me in the hospital and treat me, because of course I did have the biological mental illness, and I had sort of, you know, discontinued my medication. That's why they didn't really care whether or not the knife thing happened. For them it was just, you know, the authority. But, I wasn't prepared to accept that my entire life I was going to be on those drugs. I wasn't prepared to accept that what I had been would be forever lost to me because I would be on these drugs. And they're the people who told me the only other option was to do something no one had done before. It wasn't my fault. I believed that that was my endeavor, but if that was what was required of me, I was going to do it. After I was successful, of course, I found the movement, and it turns out all of us believe we were the first and none of us were. And I really wish, people in the midst of it were made aware that these things really do happen. People experience this, and they're fine, and not on medication anymore, and can lead successful, happy lives. Because whatever the shape of it, whatever your position on biological psychiatry, or whether you believe schizophrenia as an entity is a phenomenologically real thing, the reality is that, these things that people are being told are at least contradicted by an overwhelming set of examples, and not just a few. And the question of people who had been on neuroleptics for 10 years and are no longer on neuroleptics is horribly under-researched in the literature. They don't even know for sure what that did to you, because just having the notion that people were on neuroleptics and then off of it in the literature would seem a bit absurd. Nobody asks these questions, so it's really hard to say for sure exactly what had happened to me, or exactly what the damage might have been. All there is the information that neuroleptics change brain structure. Dr. Torrey thinks that's wonderful. Some people think it's awful. The subjective experience was terrible, and nobody had a right to modify my brain structure. But, I was willing, if it was necessary, to be the first. And I think the reason for that is because I do like making noise, but I think it was just that it was awful enough that if I had to figure out how to do that, even if it was impossible, it was worth trying. But nobody, instead of saying, good for you, you're going to try and do this thing, they were like, oh, no, you might actually discover it's possible. Only their thinking was, you're going to destroy yourself, and we don't want to see that happen. In fact, we want to see that happen so little, we're not going to give you the chance. Which actually, in effect, if they had been successful for that for my whole life, would have probably, prevented me from doing any of the things I've done. But, the purpose of a behavioral modification system for adolescents is the breaking of human souls. And they do it by many means. They will do it by every little behavior, rewarding what they want, punishing what they don't. There are even studies which indicate that tokenizing it work effectively, because then there's a discrete gain and loss for each behavior, which is probably a great way to get what you want out of people. But from, a human rights perspective, I've got some serious reservations about that in the best of cases, and in the way it's frequently implemented, especially when there are horrible punitive options, like, option 1, sit cross-legged and face the wall in front of all of your peers. You refuse to comply with that. Option 2, go back to the seclusion room. You really don't want option 3, because option 3 includes option 2. Yeah.
What else?
Option 3 includes option 2 and that blue X I drew. So, I was in a position where I knew they were out to produce what they wanted, and they believed what they wanted was right, and I knew it was wrong, and I knew they didn't take me seriously about that. And I don't know why I kept with that, other than the fact that the drugs were sufficiently awful. These drugs are sufficiently unpleasant to be on, that you will continue trying a thing like that after you have failed. When I was 14 and I discontinued my medication, I ended up in Centennial Peaks and then Cleo Wallace and the FACT team, and yet within 2 years I was trying it again anyways, because they're just that awful of drugs. And I imagine that segues into the notes I was looking for. So I'm going to just try and give you chronology, because I think this says something. I'm just going to read a few sentences from each of these regarding how I felt about the drugs. We'll start in February of 2000, nearly a year before I finally told these people to go screw themselves again. Client continues to maintain his medication regimen, although he wants to advocate that his meds should be reduced if not eliminated altogether. FACT shall continue current treatment services. However, talks towards discharge shall occur into the next month, February 2000. Then we have May of 2000, and here it says, Client continues to take his medication regularly, however seems to badger Dr. Eliopoulos, client psychiatrist, in terminating all meds. This therapist shall continue seeing client, da-da-da. And then in July, client claims he is complying with his meds, yet believes he should be off them when he sees Dr. Eliopoulos, client psychiatrist. And then we get it forward a little more to October of 2000. And the note reads, client seems to gain some insight in how his meds could be helpful. Client seems very headstrong about terminating his medications and tries to bargain with Dr. Eliopoulos to eliminate them. Client becomes discouraged when the answer is no. He seems to view this as someone having power over him. Imagine that. Imagine that, by the way, it's not the chart. Client seems to gain some insight in how his meds could be helpful, or Dr. Eliopoulos is erring on the side of safety. However, client's arrogance and alleged omnipotence keeps him from giving Dr. Eliopoulos the benefit of the doubt. That was October. Now let's go forward to November, where the note says as follows. Therefore, he believes he must... here we go. However, the client seems to have made some progress in focusing on his own actions that have contributed towards past hospitalizations. This is November 2000. The whole time I was in this man's care, his basic solution-oriented approach was to get me to take responsibility for my own behavior, which meant admitting that I was wrong and my mother, who was beating the shit out of me, was correct, that I was biologically defective, and to take responsibility for everything my mother said I did as a symptom of my illness, especially when it wasn't true. So he's encouraging my progress because I started to phrase things differently. I used to refer to my mother as a bold-faced liar, and I used to say the things that she said were lies. As time progressed and, Dan was an asshole, I learned that it was simply easier to tell him that I seriously doubted that that was true, but anything was possible. And, he seemed to be satisfied because I was making progress towards admitting it might be. And I was just, busy basically keeping the point but shooting myself in the foot, but, it got him a little bit further off my ass. Here we go. This is a small step in self-reflection. However, his narrative continues to be overwhelmed by victimization and the need for retribution. What is notable is that client can focus on constructive activities at school and his work with computers. This therapist shall continue to monitor client's progress. So that was, 2000, November. Then we get on to January of 2001, and it's like client. He continues to be on medication clinic status. Client has been able to maintain compliance towards his medications, despite protesting to continue taking them. He still sees no need to take his meds, save for Dr. Eliopoulos, client's psychiatrist, as being paranoid. And then they did concede that, like, client's medications were reduced this month and may be eliminated next month, if all goes well. However, here's the note from next month. Client made an arbitrary decision to not take his medications after his last session with Dr. Eliopoulos, client psychiatrist. This is from February 18th, 2001. He was more concerned about a recent argument with his mother where he believed she was decompensating emotionally. He stated that he wanted this therapist to know in case his mother started making accusations towards client. Client did acknowledge not taking his meds in our session. He appeared rather confident about his maneuver and claimed he has felt okay without them. He did acknowledge that Dr. E had to err on the side of safety instead of okaying client stopping his meds in December. And then, April. So, this gets me to February 2001, where I had, again, stopped everything after 2 years under the FACT team's love and care. And, I was a senior in high school, I was 16 years old, and I was getting on close to graduation, and I thought I had sort of proved my point. I had been working at McDonald's 20 hours a week for a while, this whole time. I was about to graduate high school a year early. As soon as I could, I got an internship in the computer field and got the hell out of retail. Which actually happened when I was 16. So during this note, I was already working on my computer crap, and he's still sitting there, basically saying, oh my goodness, this client is discontinuing medication. Now, that was in February, and around March, my very last note with the psychiatrist was March 2nd, oh wait, that's 99, 2000, oh. So, actually, this was my very second note, but my very last note is on the other side of the stack.
And that stack you have there, how long is that? What's the time frame of just
this
the
stack of papers, including this stuff and this stuff, but not this, is from 2 years.
And the sessions, how many times a week, or is it once a week? Or
the assholes
roughly?
start in the beginning. It was once a week. Then they started coming less frequently because they didn't need to, which is one of the many benefits of selling out. Less supervision means more freedom, means less selling out, ironically. But so yes, I just pulled that out. This is the final page of my notes, where okay, I have this pulled aside where Dan Shearer. Okay, well they're in a stack somewhere, but basically what it reads is that client appears to be developing narcissistic personality disorder. He's grandiose and a bit pressured, but not displaying enough symptoms to clearly call him manic, and does not meet the 2710 commitment criteria. And that was pretty much the last time I felt like speaking to the psychiatrist, because, well, once it says in your chart you don't meet the commitment criteria, you pretty much own them, you'd think, right? You're free. Yeah, that's not accurate. I know this was going to go pretty well. I thought come February I was going to graduate high school. I was going to get the hell out of home. Now stand by for a moment. Hello. Yeah, we're still making the tape if you don't mind just sort of like being... So this actually gets me into this second major trauma, which was in many ways the completion of the first. Last time I told my story publicly, I was focusing primarily on the first, that moment in the seclusion room for, not hard to guess reasons. It was a big deal, but, I came to peace with that more rapidly as I found my way into the movement. I found the movement in like 2005, 2006, and it was easier to tell that older stuff because I had come to terms with it. But the stuff I'm about to tell, I actually have only glossed over previously because it was hard to tell, even as, an activist who was out telling my story. But, you know what? Fuck it. Let's go. In April, I need to find... While I was busy trying to demonstrate this stack of papers, I relocated my stack of goodness. So this... December 2000. This is probably the stack of my hard and relevant data. No, May 2001, June, May. Here we go. May, March. No. I just pulled these out specifically to tell this story, and then I picked up the stack. You'll have to give me a moment to find where I put the right. Here they are, right on top. So, this whole time, as has been clearly stated, did I read one of the blurbs where I said that my mother was intentionally trying to put me in the hospital, or did I not include that part because I was trying to make the medication story?
No.
Oh, well then, I actually need to read a few more lines from one of those various pages. Trying to do this quickly and with as limited disorganization as possible. January 2001, function well, no psychiatric behaviors, client stated that he believes his mother will still attempt to get him hospitalized if he does not do what she says. He still sometimes believes that his mother is trying to sabotage his treatment. This is a note from January 2001. Although when confronted, he seems to acknowledge that this may not be true. I shouldn't have lost my spot, but that was a hell of a sentence. He continues to denounce any means of having a relationship with his father, denies homicidal ideation, and what continues to be notable is that client can focus on constructive activities at school and his work with a computer business. So basically, you know, and there are a bazillion places in here where I expressly told Dan that my father was that my mother was actively lying in order to have me forced into treatment. It's all over these notes. October 2000 was another I read. However, client is generally well-mannered during med session. Oh, actually, this is worth reading. Let's see. Client claims client, yet he believes he should be off them is wrong to keep him on them. Did I read August? I didn't read August. This is August 2000. Client claims he is complying with meds, yet believes he should be off of them, and that Dr. Eliopoulos is wrong to keep him on them. He seems to continue his adversary role with Dr. E. However, client is generally well-mannered during med sessions. I can insult you and you won't even know that's what I did. He claims that all is going well at home. This is somewhat true until client's brother comes to visit, which client continues to have a hard time being nice. Now, actually, funny story. Yeah, my mom was making all of that up. Yeah, I'm asking myself that question too.
It was at 4 minutes. You had mentioned your brother. That's
Yeah, I noticed that. Now, this doesn't mention my brother in a psychiatric context. I don't know if that's...
Okay.
I mean...
yeah.
I think it's fine as long as we then omit this part I just said.
Yeah, it will. Well, reviewing it, we now have said it, so we'll know.
I got it written down.
Yes.
Okay.
You know, I mean, we have to cover my brother about the psychiatric shit for obvious reasons. Other than that, the fact that, you know... yeah, actually, we should remove the entire thing about Jason, because the next story I was going to tell about was about teaching my brother to pick locks, but I'm not sure how I can tell that without telling things that I can't tell, so let's just omit the whole section.
Got it.
Not until I get, you know, not only until I get to Jason, and then just cut from there,
Sure.
I guess.
Yep.
Just because I can't tell that story. Let's see. So, you know, all throughout this time, I was basically telling him that my mother was full of crap. For instance, here in October, he states that he fears his mother will somehow attempt to sabotage his efforts and try to get him hospitalized. Next sentence. Client seems to have some doubts of his own coping skills that he clearly did not have 2 years ago. And, I mean, these records are chock full of this shit, but, you know, left and right, I was telling him that my mom was lying to have me treated. Now, it took me a while to start telling him that I was getting my ass kicked, because he wasn't gonna believe it. You know, I told him about the thing, I had a report documenting. I didn't have a piece of paper, I didn't have this at the time either, I just knew about its existence vaguely. This is the report that actually identifies my mother as suffering from Munchausen's by proxy. It's something like page 22. Anyways, so I was telling the fact team that they were using force against me based on the reports of somebody who was telling lies and had been previously caught telling lies, and that the data, which indeed is on the record of Jefferson County District Court, in case number 95DR3275. Of course, it's under seal. Yeah, and there's no need to cut the case number. Actually, I would love it if this document weren't under seal, but there are probably good reasons it's under seal and not because it names my mom. Anyhow, so, in February, I was ready to take that stab yet again, despite the fact that I apparently had no insight into my belief in my omnipotence or my own arrogance. Because clearly I was not going to be successful off medication. The last 10 years have not happened. Anyways, I love it how I'm still trying to avoid actually getting to April. Did you see where I put the stack of papers this time?
I believe it's that stack.
May, March. No, it wasn't this stack. It was this September 2001. And it was this stack. Why do I... Oh, because August was in my pardon evidence stack. That's right. There's a good reason for that. So, you know, I always knew if I wanted my mom going down for kicking my ass, she pretty much had to be caught red-handed because, you know, I was psychotic. I was a mental patient. No one was going to believe me. So in April, my mother was kind enough to get herself caught red-handed. And Dan was kind enough to conclude that that had to be a manifestation of my psychosis too. April 11th. I'm just going to read this verbatim and see how it strikes you. April 11th, 2001. Therapist/case manager. Dan Shearer, MS. On site, 30 minutes. Received call from client's mother. She stated that police had just arrived because client hit her in the face. She sounded more agitated at the police because they claimed mother should be arrested instead of client because she hit him first. Noted to mother that this therapist would come over immediately to resolve this matter. Hi, Dan. Guess what? I changed my prefix code too. 4/11/2001. Off-site, 30 minutes. Met with Broomfield Police outside on client's residence. Discussed their altercation and how this therapist has been on the phone with them. Also noted how this situation could be resolved without arresting anyone. The police officer noted that they would most likely arrest mother for attacking client. We agreed to work with the family via a family session instead of incarcerating anyone. Well, so let's see if we can decompress what Dan wrote down here. He says that my mom called him and said I hit her in the face. And yeah, she made that accusation. My brother, by the way, was a witness to this. My brother watched this entire altercation. And, you know, the only thing he saw me do was put my arms up to try and block incoming blows from my mom. And, you know, that's all I remember doing too. And the police were not terribly convinced I hit her in the face since I was the only one who had marks. But Dan Shearer came over and he's like, dude, I'm from the state level, you guys are city cops, you know, I'm with the fact team, it's this big deal, it's a mental patient, social services is actively managing this house, and if you go and arrest the mother, it's going to really mess up the situation. And the police didn't arrest anyone that day. In fact, there's not even a record that this happened other than in Dan's notes as far as I'm aware. I mean, there's something in the police computer dispatch system, but there's no police report. And so I had done everything right. I hadn't defended myself. I let my mother land all the blows, and I made sure there was a witness. And this therapist came based on the claim that I was paranoid and at my mother's request, and saved her ass from going up for it. And that was the only way anyone was ever going to believe me, as if she got caught red-handed. And I told him what had been happening, and here's what he wrote. April 11th. Client continues to remain on medication clinic status. This month was somewhat turbulent for client and his mother. On 4/11, a physical altercation between them occurred. We were able to conduct an emergency family session with Broomfield Police present. Client sounded rather paranoid about the police there. He stated that his mother would convince them that he should go to jail and how he would have no mental defense against his mother and the police together. Client was referring to past hospitalizations and has accused the police for colluding with his mother to get him hospitalized. The therapist reminded client that he has the skills to perform socially acceptable, even in front of the police. Client was able to maintain fairly well with minimum outburst when attempting to retort his mother. What client needs to focus on, by the way, there are a huge section of black lines. You see, this is what we call secret evidence against me. I'm not allowed to see what's under these lines. Now, I would be, arrested in a slightly different incident, but they considered it perfectly acceptable to prevent me from having access to the things my mother said, which probably would have further documented the Munchausens by proxy. By the way, I would like to identify this document into the record. It is the report of Kelly Spooner, PsyD, a licensed clinical and forensic psychologist, dated January the 15th, 1997, custody evaluation. Anyhow, what client needs to focus on is being compassionate about his mother's mental illness instead of confronting her with it. This is right after he stopped her from getting arrested for beating me up. In our session with Dr. Eliopoulos, client psychiatrist, it was more of the same. While client made some appropriate comment on taking responsibility for his behavior, he spent more time retorting his mother and not hearing anyone else. Client stated he does this because he fears his mother can still get him hospitalized. He seems to see some insight in how he could be less hostile towards his mother. However, it appears that client's own mental processes continue to interfere with his coping skills around the house. Client claims he has not experienced and severe mood swings, sick, since he has been off his medications. That's SIC, by the way. His mother reports that he seems to be getting worse. This was April, and so I was apparently paranoid for telling my therapist that my mother, who was lying and would likely continue to tell lies, would have my ass arrested. Now, here's what actually happened that day. It was a standard day, which means at some point my mother and I were arguing. And like usual, you know, I'd own her verbally because I'm way smarter than she is. And I'm sorry, it's just true. And when she was irrational and cruel and abusive, you bet your ass I showed it off. You bet your ass I did. So eventually she'd start hitting me because, you know, that's how you respond to a superior opponent, right? If you can't beat them verbally, you punch them. And trudging really does work really well to make people stop being annoying. So, you know, she had me. And I told her, guess what, Mom? You just fucked up. Because you just did that in front of a witness. So she went in the other room and called the police. Because I had made the mistake of telling her that, you know, I had her, and she decided to reformulate the circumstance. She told the cops, and Dan, I hit her in the face. The cops didn't take it very seriously. I'm sure Dan believed it. Well, maybe he believed it, maybe he didn't. I've since learned that Dan wasn't exactly playing it straight. We'll get to that in a moment, and it's... Let's just put it this way. That thought does not originate in my own mind. In that, you know, I have compelling documentary evidence, not in that it's being inserted. I love it how, no matter what I say, I have to explain how it's not something you can twist into psychosis somehow. I clearly think I'm still talking to Dan. So, come July of 2001, and this was after it had been made abundantly clear to me that there was no help, because, you know, well, normally in response to domestic violence, you know, separate the problem and then try to make everyone safe. Dan seemed to think the proper response to domestic violence was to have a family therapy session and then ignore it. Hi, Dan. The best part is, Dan is going to totally think it's a feature of my pathology, since I keep saying hi to him, but really, I just think he's an asshole, and I love the fact that everyone else is going to too. 7:15. Client reported that he was engaged in a physical altercation with his mother. He claimed that she started beating on him and how he defended himself, which resulted in mother calling the police. Not entirely accurate. She started beating on myself, I defended myself, then I called the police. Which is funny. I think there's a rule. My mom called the police, they'd usually take me to the hospital, but when it was a domestic violence situation, of course my mom called the police, so they wanted to arrest her. And I called the police today. This is July 15th, 2001. Client claims that he feared his mother, no, that's not right. Actually, that's awful. Might as well read it, I started it. Client claimed he feared his mother would go to jail since police claimed she should go in their last fight in May 2001. Yeah, he's got that in his records twice. Thus client did not report. That's not entirely accurate. It's just that, you know, I was trying to get him to listen to me. I rather did report my mother's behavior, they just didn't care about what happened anything other than that day. And, you know, she'd been caught red-handed, but I'm trying to say, Dan, listen to me! And he's like, well, dude, if your mother was beating you up, she'd have been beating you up forever. And I'm like, yes! But, you know, it's not like I could go to Dan and say, Dan, would you get me out of this home? Because Dan made it clear, if I got out of the home, what I was looking at was long-term hospitalization. My choices were with my mother or in a... Sorry.
Your choices were...
See, Dan, that outburst resulted in the thing falling to the floor. Clearly I need to be in one. I was still recording. Oh, actually, when it gets to that point, remind me to pull some objects out of the closet. I'm going to show you the actual devices. Okay, so, client stated that he would like to emancipate from his mother. He seemed somewhat willing to speak to Jessica Fry, client's DSS caseworker, regarding this. Client was supposed to be discharged from FAC this month. However, with the latest incident, the therapist will remain available until client is emancipated or their issues are resolved. So, there's something you need to know. I struck my mother that day with a flashlight. I was cornered. I was sitting on my bed. There was nowhere further back to retreat to. She had already landed blows on me that day, which resulted in marks which are documented by the police, which consisted of, let's see, car keys, pens, her hands. I had bite marks from her that were documented by the police. And this was the early part of the altercation in the car. And then it continued. And by altercation, which is what Dan called it, what I mean is beating. Because it's an altercation if there are two parties. But if one party is just being a verbal jackass because the other party is a physical jackass, and, you know, that's the sort of thing you really legitimately can be a verbal jackass about, then, you know, it's not an altercation, it's abuse. But it didn't serve Dan's worldview to see me as getting the shit kicked out of me by my mother, because he heard that as consistent with paranoia. Maybe. I always believed that that's what he thought. I always believed that that was his reason for not acting, was because he thought I was paranoid and didn't think anything I was telling him was true. But you're going to want to hear how this story ends. So, the police made their decision. I gave my statement, shouldn't have done that. I should never have called the police. If you are a victim of domestic violence, I do not recommend you call the police. It's a stupid action. I would recommend just about anything else, up to and including defending yourself. But if you call the police, the only time it is safe to do so is a time you have taken no action to defend yourself. If you want to be free to call the cops, I'm sorry, you gotta take a beating. It sucks, but trust me, it's the only way. And then if you're a mental patient, even that's not enough, as was evidenced in April. In July, the cops were out there. Dan wasn't answering his pager, or I'm sure he probably would have come out and stopped anyone from getting arrested again. And there would have been another incident involving police in another 2 months. But, you know, at least that day, I wouldn't have been in handcuffs. Unfortunately, Dan wasn't answering his pager. So, you know, I don't think he was particularly partial to my mom. I think he was just trying, you know, to keep his own control over the situation and not have other stuff involved. I think he probably thought he was saving me in April, the way he describes it, but then he didn't. I'm starting to ramble. This part will probably be cut. It doesn't need to be cut. It's not available as data. It's just, it's not eloquent. God fucking damn it. So, after I told the police what happened, and my mother told the police what happened, and naturally, you know, I tried to be very detailed and accurate and specific, and God, I was an idiot. I did about the dumbest thing you could. Because the police are not there to help you when you're a mental patient. Well, they are there to help you, but not what I mean. I was taken away to some sort of juvenile assessment center. I was there 2 hours, and then they released me back to my mom, end of that. And I had a court date in a couple of months to go and, you know, answer for my battery while I was still living with my mother. And let's just say, hypothetically, I was beating my mother up like she claimed. Yeah, I'm gonna go with sending me back home was probably not the wisest choice. So let's look at the other possibility. Because I had a bunch of marks. She had the one from, you know, after I warned her twice, and then she still came at me. So just by, you know, count of marks, I also got my ass kicked there. But let's just say that, you know, maybe, just maybe, instead of being paranoid, I was telling the truth. Especially since, you know, in April there was a witness. And, you know, since I had marks. Then it was a really dumb choice sending me home with my mother. But, you know, what were they going to do? I wasn't dangerous enough to hold, and that's all they cared about. So, I was sent home, and Dan was like, oh, we need to do something about this. So the Family and Community Team, via Boulder County Mental Health, the entity is now known as Mental Health Partners of Boulder and Broomfield Counties, they've changed their name, went to the prosecutor without a release, and negotiated a plea agreement which involved me pleading guilty. Now, if you believe Dan, he didn't understand that that's what he was doing. But you can't deny that he went to them and negotiated an agreement. He just seems to think, you know, that it was a different agreement than the one he actually negotiated. Which probably makes sense. He's a therapist, not a lawyer. I wasn't allowed an attorney. I was a minor. My mother had all my rights. I kept asking for one. No one was interested in providing one. But Dan told me that his license involved knowing about Colorado law. I love about this is it's all going to fact check too. And he thought he had a great solution. In fact, I kept telling him, let me read you from August. So in July, I got my ass arrested, and he was about to, have me sent away, but that wasn't going to take place. So here's August. Client changed his mind about emancipation. Not exactly accurate. He claimed he should stay with his mother since she received HUD housing. Therefore, he would not have to worry about housing expenses. He also stated that he could not emancipate since his mother is CEO of his company, and she would most likely destroy him if he moved out. Client sounded rather paranoid, as in the past, of how his mother is trying to ruin him. When asked about the fight between them, Client said he will simply just try to stay away from her. Client claims that his mother needs him there so she can collect on child support. A claim Client's mother, of course, denies. On 8/22, Client reported that he visited his father. He stated that he did not trust... here we go. Both Client and his mother appear afraid of the prospect of living separately, and both seem committed to living together until Client turns 18. Both have declined continual outpatient therapy. Client has declined revisiting his medications to assist with his moods. Therefore, this therapist shall discharge Client from FACT program, since family is no longer in need of intensive outpatient therapy. However, it should be noted that Client and his mother could benefit from ongoing conjoint therapy despite their refusals. This note is dated 2 dates, August 10th, my birthday, and August 22nd. And unfortunately, there's no specific note of what part of it is from what day. However, a month later, on September the 10th, 2001, the following document got signed. I have 2 copies of April 11th. Oh. I've also been meaning to take some imaging software and a really good scanner to these and see if I can remove the black lines from anything. Because a little bit of the original text actually survived their redaction. They also noticed that I have a piece of correspondence from my original request for my chart pertaining to that request, which I got on a subsequent request, where they explicitly noted that they were blacking out everything that had to do with my mother. Anything she said that they didn't think I knew about was blacked out in my charts. So, assuming that the FACT team was aware of the Munchausen's issue, they were actively preventing me from being able to prove it. Now, of course, nothing on the records demonstrates that they were aware of it. I'll get to that in a minute. I'm looking for... Oh, this is my huge ass pile of copies. Okay. I need to keep this separate. So remind me that this stack here is from the master book, because it needs to go back in.
We have 37 minutes left to go.
Oh shit. Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I really don't want to take away from it, but I just, so you have that much time to be able to talk about other things if you want.
Okay.
As well. Just so you know the time frame, what's left on this, unless we pop another SD or whatever, so.
I do have an SD card in my laptop. I could reformat it or something.
I think we have another one.
Where was I? Oh, yes. So this is state defendant joint motion for deferred judgment and sentencing, and this is, well, it's sort of my signature. It passes for a signature, I suppose. And this is my mother's signature, which is highlighted. And this is an agreement which requires me to, quote, continue current therapy program with Mental Health Center of Boulder County until completion or end of deferred judgment period. So he's basically, the prosecutor even got the words wrong, which was sort of fun. But he was basically requiring me until the day before my 18th birthday. This agreement terminated October 9th, 2002, which was the day before I turned 18, to plead guilty to battering my mother. This whole time, meanwhile, I was asserting that she had Munchausen's, that she was actively abusing me, and that the only actual offensive act I took towards her was taken after a very thorough, proper, and well-researched legal warning, just to make sure it was legal before I did it. But, the funny thing about following the law is that doesn't matter if you don't have a trial. I told Dan I wanted a trial. I told the prosecutor I wanted a trial. I told them I was being beaten and that my mother was actively destroying and hiding evidence. And of course they felt that that was paranoid. But rather than telling the court that I wanted to act on my paranoia and that maybe that interfered with anything, they simply encouraged me to enter the plea. And I did. Not really willingly. Not really because I wanted to, but because I had done everything I could to prove to them what was going on in that home. I told them the name of the report, the date, where it could be found, the case number. I told them to talk to my brother, to look for evidence. But they didn't care. Evidence didn't matter to them. They were telling me I was schizophrenic. Well, they didn't actually think I was schizophrenic. They thought I was paranoid, and they never were more clear than that. But they were telling me that I was psychotic, that I was paranoid, and they could not integrate counter-evidence I offered them by name because they were too arrogant to look into it. So, after I told them that I had to withdraw my request to emancipate, because after I told them I wanted to emancipate, they asked my mother what she felt about it. My mother told them, well, I don't know what she told them. She told me that if I attempted to emancipate, since, you know, I was a mental patient, that pretty much social services would just own me. She told me that she would take measures against me and that she could. She told me she would go and dissolve my company, which of course, you know, it wasn't much yet. Dan didn't believe it was anything yet. Stand by. This is me. This is the cover page of Frontier Tech Base, by the way. This was the thing I showed Dan that I didn't name when he's like, wow, that really is impressive. But, yeah. Long story, that's more the triumph side, which isn't mostly what we're getting at, but, not yet. Actually, we didn't have time. But, so, you know, Dan didn't take that seriously, but for me, that was my one ticket out. Because if I didn't have that, you know, my mom was never going to let me get away from her. And that was my chance to build something and be free. And so, you know, it wasn't even really the abuse I was afraid of, because my mom was going to kick my ass either way. She was probably going to have extra specific cause to kick my ass if I tried to plead not guilty, you know. I don't know if you're going to want to tell this story or not, because it might be insensitive. But, you know, the evening after this agreement was signed, I was grounded to my room for asking to plead not guilty by my mother. I'm surprised she didn't beat me up, because I would have expected that, but she didn't that particular day. She simply grounded me. And the next morning, I will always remember that I was being yelled at because I was supposed to be grounded to my room for requesting to enter a plea of not guilty in court the following day. And I will, of course, always remember that because of what was on TV as soon as it came up. I don't know what that means. It's probably not a story worth telling, but it's pretty fucked up. Anyways, the world has to keep going. Always does. 9/12/2001, I entered the not guilty, or the no contest plea as I was told. I spoke to Dan Shearer on the phone. I told him I didn't want to do it. He told me I had to, but, you know, I've been going over that conversation and asking if it might be consistent that he just wasn't listening to me about the deal he made. It's possible, I suppose. God, litigation counsel would be annoyed at me for admitting this, but, you know, I care about the truth here, not, you know, bullshit posturing. That's Dan's business. It's possible, I suppose, that he didn't realize that that what he had done was arrange for a guilty plea. And as a result of that, he wasn't taking me seriously as I told him I really didn't want to do it. But when you are reporting that you are being abused and you are being accused of a crime by the person who's abusing you, and you make it clear that you want to present a defense, and you're willing to do it pro se if that's what it takes, if you're not allowed a lawyer, but you still want to do it, and you keep telling them you're being beaten, and their reply is, take the deal. I don't know about you, but that makes me awfully uncomfortable. So, in that meeting with that prosecutor on 9/10, he told me I had to live with my mother, and that they were trying to make that possible. And I kept telling him to shove the piece of paper up his ass until I realized that I had to live with my mother. And if I wanted a trial, I had to live with her for another few months while I waited for the trial. If I wanted to subpoena evidence, she would be my guardian signing the subpoena, and I doubt that evidence would have lasted long enough for me to get to court with it. And Dan knew all of this was going on. Some of it he might have thought I was paranoid about, but he knew some of it was real. He has admitted that fact. So, I really can't explain why he didn't care that I told him I wanted to assert my rights. I can't explain why he didn't care that he set up a criminal verdict against me. And yes, it was a deferred judgment. And yes, the court dismissed it because I complied. I'll get to that in a minute. But what is a mental health professional thinking when they decide that they can criminalize a client in order to force them into treatment, knowing that it's probably bullshit they're criminalizing them over? Dan Shearer, your name will be synonymous with deep crimes. Have a nice day. Fuck you, by the way. So, for a year, let me read you my last page of notes. Because this is how I got out of the fact team. You want to know how I got out? I got out by simultaneously being court ordered to stay in and then not. And they were willing to let that happen probably because at somewhere along the line they realized they were really fucking up. Dan, you will also notice that while the camera has been running, I have not threatened to nuke anyone. The laugh is because the camera hasn't been running all night.
Are you going to need battery?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to flip through this quickly knowing that there's limited tape.
It's got like 20 plus minutes for battery.
Okay. September.
So I figure just go with it until it tells me I need it.
Okay, I just had the 2001 notes up again. Where did I put them? I'm just going to put this, January 2000, no, this is the wrong stack, because I have the special ones pulled out.
The one in the masters that are in the back from the master list? Is that what you're looking for? There's a far left corner.
That actually probably does contain it there. Thank you. Yeah, I acknowledge I look pretty schizophrenic with all these papers, but I assure you, there's good shit on them. April, August, July. No. Come on. July. Jason. Amy. Come on. Okay. No. They got mixed into this stack before the master stack was pulled aside, so August 2001, here we go. You might want to stop it while I rifle real quick just to conserve tape. So, here is the final page of notes. 9/10. Client was discharged last month, however he and his mother requested that this therapist assistance in their domestic violence charge. Well, I don't remember requesting that. I'm sure my mother did. I've requested the release, which authorized this interaction, and Boulder County Mental Health was unable to provide it. I also asked them for any document I signed authorizing treatment, and they were unable to provide that. They do have a set of releases, which authorize them to speak to social services only, which never bore my signature, but, you know, abuse reports don't need a release, and everything else he did without a release, probably unethical. This therapist met with the family and the DA to resolve this issue before court. Client appeared to handle himself fairly well, and his mother remained mostly quiet. After the meeting, client seemed pleased with the outcome. And I suppose I should explain it. The funny thing is, it wouldn't surprise me if Dan didn't describe my explanation as evidence of a manifestation of inappropriate affect. But, you know, you reach a point, and this is a thing I don't think people should know. Nobody should have to, but when you've reached a point where you put in all the fights you can, it's again that moment of surrender where you understand that you are utterly fucked, and that your only choice is to go fall on your sword in some sort of notable, futile, stupid gesture, or to play along and maybe save your future, if you're lucky. I tried so hard to get them to listen to hear, and I understood that there was nothing, no amount of evidence, there was nothing in my power to convince them. I don't think it would have mattered if I started to call down miracles. So I understood I was fucked. And you reach that point when you're at one with the brokenness. Sometimes something strange, terrible strange happens. Bizarre release of endorphins. Your body somehow comprehends. It's almost peaceful. Dan certainly mistook it. He thought I was grateful for his help. He had just destroyed me. Well, almost. I'm gonna return the favor, though. Maybe. Who knows? It was a long time ago. I don't know if anybody cares what I can prove now, but I can sure as fuck prove it. So, you know, they decided that this was the resolution, and they saw it through. I didn't even get to meet with Jessica Fry until after the guilty plea was accepted, and at that point she wasn't interested in the fact that I claimed I was being abused, because, you know, I pled guilty. Well, no contest, but I always wondered at that what exactly they thought they were doing, arranging the deal, and then pretending that it controlled the outcome. But social services was a different office from the rest. In fact, and it's possible Jessica Fry was not entirely aware of what the treatment team had done. And of course, I only know for sure Dan was involved. It is his claim that the rest of the treatment team was. So, I had been trying to assert my rights. I had been trying to find some way to prove these significant things. I knew the names of some of the evidence. I had witnesses who had observed the abuse, but I also knew my mother would interfere. I knew she would prevent me from bringing it to trial. As long as I lived with her, I had no way to fight back. I wasn't that strong. No one is that strong. How was I to have a fair trial under those circumstances? Would you answer me that? I intend to put that question formally to the state of Colorado in short order. I was broken. This moment, no one was on top of me. No seclusion rooms, no restraint. I could breathe fine. I think that made it worse. It would have been different if they just wanted me to comply. But they needed me to say it. I wanted to fight. I wanted to go in and say, fuck it all. I'm gonna try anyways. But Dan was correct and convincing. He told me that if I tried, it was just going to cause more chaos at home, and that in all probability, I would end up institutionalized as a result of it. That I might become attached to the system for the rest of my life if I tried to fight back. I meant to do this. And I was aware of the military situation. I complied. Maybe it makes me a moral coward that I did so. Maybe it makes me pragmatic and wise and tactical, just like Dan said I was. Of course, when Dan talked about tactics, he told me to be tactical. What he meant was to understand I was overpowered and give in. Of course, if he's curious about what real tactics look like, he'll shortly understand a little better. But can you imagine that? Going into court knowing that you are about to participate in a kangaroo proceeding that is blatantly such. And if you try to resist, you will be destroyed. And knowing that what you are about to do is wrong and necessary. And that you will bear that guilt. And that your mother will be able to do anything she wants to you. You might even be stuck back on drugs, though I did manage to avert that. Not particularly above board, but you know what? I had tried so very hard to get them to listen. I had offered them names and dates and proof. But they could judge that all without looking at it. Because I had a mental illness. That's not acceptable. When I turned 18, I'd already started the process of my gender transition by importing illegal hormones. When I lived my life, I actually didn't get out of my mother's house till I was almost 19. I actually used it's bullshit to get away from her. My mom was in Section 8 housing because she's white trash and useless, and well, you know, generally I wouldn't say those things about someone. This is my mother, I think I'm allowed. Also, it implies I was white trash, so I get to. But, you know, I pointed out to her that since, you know, I'd sort of pled no contest to beating her, and that, you know, you can't get housing benefits if you have a domestic violence history, and that if she wanted me to live in her house, she was going to have to disclose that history to the HUD people. That's how I got out. I got out with her blessing, because I kicked their ass on a point of law. Couldn't do anything else. Took a long, long time before I was ready to start fighting back. It was slow at first. I was out of there in 2003. By 2005, I started, you know, finding the movement, getting into it, but it took time. It wasn't until 2007 I first moved the court to do something about this. The court, of course, declined jurisdiction. A particular type of proceeding could not be modified after the fact. I fought it all the way to the Supreme Court, lobbied Congress for a few years, found out that, you know, I actually have a list of politicians I have personally lost respect for cause. And I suppose that implies I've lived well. But none of them were interested. They would tell me things like, I was advised of my rights and entered the plea. Or, you know, I should have done a better job of speaking up. I should have been more clear. Well, all of those points stand pretty well refuted. But that took time too. I finally decided I was going to have to do something a little bit broader than I had originally meant, or originally dreamt of. Last December, less than a calendar year from now, I had been fighting this, trying to lobby after I ran out of options in the courts. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere in the courts, but I had to try. It was pro se also, so it wasn't going to work. But, especially not when I was, you know, arguing a due process violation that's endemic to the system. You basically have to be the best appeals attorney of your generation to pull that off. And I'm not. I was a pro se crazy person. But, and you know, I might make a fine attorney, but that's a thing that would have been beyond me without, you know, having basically already done it before. So, I realized when Senator Stedman replied to me with the words, "To make it possible to undo that kind of proceeding would cause more problems than it would solve." Hey, Pat. Yeah, I hate Dan more than you, but you still are a sellout fucker. I'm not going to name all of the politicians I hate, but Senator Stedman is a particularly bad case because he openly stated that matters of justice don't matter. Now, granted, his words were, would cause more problems than it would solve, which was a budgetary argument and might even have some pragmatic backing. But Mr. Stedman, I'm raising an issue of due process. An issue of due process which affects a whole people. You don't want to be on the wrong side of that one. Because in the long run of history, the people raising those issues always, always, always prevail over the people who are imposing those issues. And if you butt out, you stand guilty. But of course, that could easily just sound like a crazy person ranting. I had these notes. I could show that my mom was kicking my ass. I had the witnesses. But what I didn't have, what Dan was careful to never write down, is that he expressly was aware of those facts. Because, of course, his goal was to keep me in treatment. I was mentally ill, and I needed those meds. So, at first, I wondered how I would improve my position to the point I would be heard. Because I'm a big believer in the theory of self-interested action, and in fact all politicians act in their own interest because all people do. And so my question is, how can I get someone like Senator Stedman, who professes to care about human rights issues, but will, in the end, only care about issues which can be made of benefit to them? It won't be a bigger problem than it will solve if I am capable of magnifying the apparent public perception of the problem, because it is not a small problem. It's just an easy one to ignore. And I've been ignored quite long enough. So first, I decided I was going to go on a hunger strike, and I announced it, and I showed up, and they let me know that that was actually not possible. I couldn't stay on the Capitol grounds, not even outside. But from that, from just showing up, I got them to waive the barriers to hearing my case. Because, you know, well, with having been a deferred judgment, there wasn't previously, you know, a standard way to look at it. Actually, as a lame duck, that particular governor ended up pardoning a different deferred judgment situation. And I was perhaps ready to file, but I was concerned that it was just lip service. It's easy to agree to accept papers from someone. That doesn't mean they were going to do anything other than rubber stamp them no. And I wasn't satisfied that what I had gotten from them was sufficient, so I prepared a 1-week demonstration of capability and resolve hunger strike. Or, as it's sometimes referred, hey Dan, a nuclear testing program. But, and I actually pulled it off. I scheduled it, and I carried it out. That was May 1st through the 8th of 2011, and it was reported in the Westward. Well, online. I very specifically tried to keep it out of the press, because I was sending a message to the executive only. But I came up with the hunger strike because I realized my position sucked. All of the things that had happened to me, however awful, were mostly beyond my power to demonstrate. And no one would believe me that that's how it went. Clearly, if someone believes that that's what happened, they must be nuts. But I realized something. It had been 10 years, and I was ready to go and hunger strike for a week. And my intention in my pardon application was to threaten Governor Hickenlooper, originally Ritter, as I was first thinking of it, with dying on his doorstep if he continued to ignore these issues, because I believed that while my evidence wasn't overwhelming, it was certainly unambiguous that I got screwed. Even if I couldn't prove the state had done a malfeasance, I could very much prove that I got fucked, and that that proceeding wasn't valid. generally speaking, when a parent is putting marks on someone and also is signing the plea agreement as the guardian of the defendant. And let me also read you this. This is the transcript of my plea. Justin Shomo. Are you Justin Shomo? I am, Your Honor. Were you present when I advised all the defendants of their rights? Yes, sir. Do you feel you understand those rights? Yes, sir. Who is appearing with you, please? My mother. The charge against you is that of battery. Do you understand the nature of that charge? And I proceed to ask my mother if it's her signature on the agreement. So my parent or guardian who made the accusation also got to determine the disposition, which thankfully they were merciful and kind, and they only wanted to see me get the help I needed and couldn't get for myself. Well, I knew hunger striking was the greatest magnification of my own personal power I could carry out. I knew that I could never employ more power than I could in that act if I was willing to threaten to take it as far as it needed to be taken. But I also didn't really want to have to do that. So I started thinking, how can I improve my position? What can I do? And I realized that Dan probably wasn't a very capable opponent for me. I didn't realize that, actually. I don't even know why I said that, because I was scared of him too. You imagine, this is the guy who for 2 years owned me. And yeah, the psychiatrist probably had more to do with authorizing it. But this is the man who came from the state. This is the man who came to my house. He came to me. So, I was terrified of him, but I also knew that he knew damn well. I didn't know that he knew my mom had been doing these things. I thought he honestly believed I was paranoid. For 10 years, I tried to figure out, I tried to understand how a thing like this could happen. And the best explanation, the best hypothesis I had is that Dan believed I was nuts when I told him those things. And I was going to basically get him to admit it. I was going to get him to admit that I spoke up, because that's what everyone was telling me I had been insufficient in. And it turns out he knew all along everything that was happening to me. Because you see, having scheduled the hunger strike, having decided, because if I was going to do a 7-day hunger strike, the only purpose for that, since I didn't intend to publicize it, would be to make credible the threat of a longer one. And I realized if I was prepared to do that, surely I could face this man. And I had read many books since I last knew him. Some books had very specific topics. Some were on the diagnostic interview, or psychology generally. And some were on very specific ways of interacting with people. Dan, of course, had his techniques for dealing with the paranoid. And I had mine, which I learned from police tactics for dealing with criminal suspects in interrogation situations. And I employed the Reed technique against Mr. Shearer, successfully. I have him on tape admitting he knew. He knew my mother had Munchausen's. He knew I was getting hit. But you see, they thought I was sick. And so, they thought I was better off at home than in a hospital, of course. And that would probably be true. I would, at least in a hospital, at least at home, the person who hits you is sometimes also nice. But he knew. And I've been able to prove it by his own admission. And that's a powerful thing. And I came away from that feeling different than I went. I was almost disappointed. He wasn't hard. I went in expecting an equal opponent. I went in expecting the full of my verbal skills to be required to best this man who had, after all, been the mental health professional who once bested me. And it turned out that, unsedated and having been left to my own devices, it took me 90 minutes to get everything I could ever want on him and everything I could ever need. And I can now prove that these things were known and ignored. I can prove that force was used against me by the state, knowing that the basis for that use of force was most likely not accurate. Shearer, it's been nice knowing you. I didn't comply with the order. My mother decided to fire them. I'm not sure exactly why. Probably she smelled that they were starting to detect what she was up to. For a year I was under that court order and I did not comply. But my mother had the threat that if she just called the court and let them know I wasn't, I would be convicted of that crime. I got Dan Shearer a year later to write a letter to the court, which resulted in the case's discharge, or dismissal. Yes, it was a deferred judgment, but it's still there in the computer, even though it's sealed and expunged. And it still says that I waive my right to challenge my guilt in that matter. It doesn't say that right was taken from me by force, because there was that kangaroo proceeding, where the correct data was kept away from the due process of law and the lawful action of the courts by the knowing, complicit, and willful action of the state in the person of Daniel Shearer. And I beat him. And I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I'm glad I kicked his ass, and he had it coming. I probably screwed over his whole career, and, you know, when this was going on, I would have loved nothing more. But in retrospect, all I want is my own personal justice. It's just a shame he's going to have to be a major piece of collateral damage to make that possible. But I knew I was doing that when I went to speak to him. I knew what I meant to do. And I did it. Because it was necessary. And because now, when a politician asks me why they should care what happened, I can answer the question. Because the state did this, and it was wrong. And because people will see. Because no longer is this in the dark, no longer is it hidden, no longer is it denied access to in the name of my confidentiality, no longer is it sealed. Well, it's still sealed, and I will still deny it if I'm specifically asked that question, for instance, by a cop, because, you know, legal rights are worth nothing if you don't use them. But I can now explain to a politician why they need to fix this, because I can prove what happened. And I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's for the best. I told myself that since Dan thought I was paranoid, I would go see him and I would explain to him that I had insight now. Which was funny, because if he bothered to Google me, he could see that wasn't true. But, I told him that I understood I was paranoid, that he'd help me. I tried to present good insight now. I told myself, if it was necessary, I would bow, I would curtsy, I would humble myself, I would accept my place. As long as it put me in position with my dagger to his ribs. And when I told him I was paranoid, when I told him I understood that now, he shot me this look. And it said, It was this furrowed look of disbelief. Like, of all of the people Dan had ever worked with, I was the one he never thought would be capable of that kind of submission. And while I never did backtrack on the claim, I think that exchange of looks made it pretty clear he knew what I was doing. He knew I didn't believe that, and it might have even put him on the defensive. But I was glad it happened that way, because in that look of derision, that I was still the unrepentant mental patient. More respect than Dan could ever bring himself to be capable of was communicated. And that he just simply refused to believe I was that broken, that I was that accepting of my place. So, I proceeded with the read technique, and I proceeded with all of his own notes that I've read you. I've proceeded with my brother who witnessed the abuse, my mother who has also admitted on tape to having destroyed evidence, the report proving that she was making things up. I told him everything. I proved everything. And he admitted to the things that he had done. And he didn't do it because I told him I was a good mental patient. He knew better. So I also beat him fair and square, even though I meant to beat him by deception. And I'm rather pleased with the way that turned out. Even though it's still a sad thing. I don't know why I should feel sad that I totally fucked this man over. You know? When, you know what I referred to the whole going up to Fort Collins to see Dan thing is? Operation Danfuck. I meant to do what I did. And it's funny because, you know, when I was a kid, I threatened to destroy these people's careers left and right if I could ever prove it on them. And I don't... It's one thing to say you mean to do that, it's another thing to have it in your hands. But, you know, I intend to use the weapons at my disposal, and the ways they must be used. And while I have yet to go public, except for the fact that I'm doing it right now, with all of this stuff on Dan, I don't know. Maybe I never thought I'd win. I mean, I haven't technically won yet, but it's a strange thing to be in the place of having actually pulled it off. The hunger strike wasn't even difficult after I spoke to Dan, because I knew I was winning. I went ahead with it anyways. I'd scheduled it. I'd already sent out the letter announcing it. I couldn't not go ahead with it. The point was to demonstrate I could and would do it. But now, when I finally file that application putting the question of the meaning of due process from my people to the state, I'm not going to be relying so much on the threat of a hunger strike as I am on a conversation that I had with a man who once had all the power in the world over me, and a man who was easier to break an interrogation than anyone I've ever met. He left me a voicemail. After that, I sent him a message first. I'd like to read you the message I sent him. How are we doing on time, by the way?
I have 18 minutes on this card.
Oh, dude, we're fine. Unless I left something important out. Yeah, I love it. I go straight from the meaningful talky to, business at hand. But stand by. Wrong. Yeah. 92126.
And then I'll just have 6 questions for you after.
Here's the email I sent him after our conversation. And of course he said he needed to review his notes after we spoke, and he would get back to me on my request that he admit to the things I asked him to admit to in writing. I never told him, of course, I was taping the conversation. I always wanted that to be my last blast of a surprise.
You were legally able to do that?
Yes, in the state of Colorado, recording a conversation requires the consent of one visible party to the conversation. I was a visible party, and I provided my own consent. Fuck you, Dan. Here's what I said. This email was transmitted May 22nd, and I heard back from him the next day, and I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what he said, and then my plan for how to resolve this, and then we'll be off to the final questions. Dan, I was writing to see if you had had the chance to review what you needed to from Boulder County Mental Health. I would like to continue our discussion. Let's see if I can actually just do this both ways. Teleprompter. Ghetto teleprompter. I would like to continue our discussion now that you have had a chance to review the evidence for yourself. I suspect, upon reviewing what I have provided, you have begun to realize you erred greatly. Your intentions were not malicious, but you did much harm. You chose not to listen as I was being abused, and as I spoke up about it. Yes, you chose not to take appropriate action. You chose not to investigate that abuse report. Your own notes make that clear. You'll notice I didn't hint, I also had recording the conversation. You were misled by my mother, but your choices and your actions were your own. Your desire for and use of leverage was your own. You are accountable for your actions, not your intentions. Make no mistake, you are accountable for enabling an abuser and for being a part of the use of state power toward that end. You have a moral obligation to help undo the harm you caused. If you really do have the highest ethical standard, as you claimed, this should be self-evident to you. I leave the question of your personal ethics to your own resolution. I will not judge you by your intentions. I will judge you by the harm you caused and by what you are willing to do to undo what little can be undone. I can never be unbeaten or untreated forcibly, but perhaps I can be uncriminalized. It is hardly enough, but it is all I can hope for. Perhaps even, given the 10 years I've been off medication, and the companies I've founded, lead engineer positions I've held, the boards I've sat on, and the conferences I've spoken at, you'll even be willing to acknowledge that the use of leverage, red force, was not the correct choice. Especially what with the Munchausens by proxy. That choice was all the more yours than my mother's. I have a list of bullet points prepared, but I suspect it will have been best to have discussed the results of your inquiry prior to sending them. I also still owe you a check for your time, though I don't believe I have yet been told the total. Are you ready to continue our discussion? And I heard back from Mr. Shearer the very next day, and he told me that it was their position I was very sick, that they were very well aware of my mother's behavior, that they were completely in the right to have ignored it, because they were treating me. He said this, by the way. I have it on tape. He left it in a voicemail. He knew it was on tape because he left it in a voicemail. But then he didn't admit to the dark things I could also prove, so his message would sound very different if it weren't heard in the context of our prior conversation. But he told me that I was sick, but that they were also trying to discharge me. So they would not have been trying to treat me like that if they didn't believe I had been sick. And also their asses were covered from the Munchausens thing because they were discharging me. Which, you know, I'm pretty sure you get to make one of those points or the other. It's curious making both, it really is. But at the very last, he said he thought he was quite safe. It had been 10 years. And they had done the right thing. He didn't imagine I'd be able to show what he was telling me behind closed doors. He didn't imagine that I went to him not to ask him for help with my pardon like I claimed, but specifically to cause him to incriminate himself. And I did, in our discussion, offer him the opportunity for spin control. I told him if he was willing to admit to the key points I required, I would let him cover his ass in any way he wanted. I didn't owe him that, but I wanted to make damn sure if he went down, I had no moral culpability in that beyond having done the right thing. It would have been interesting if he had taken me up on that offer, but I did not honestly expect him to. I just made sure to make it. And he made his decision. He would hide behind the public system, and they told him to shut up, wisely, and he did. But he shut up too late, and I've got it. And I don't know. I've not been in this position before, not even the whole 10 years I was fighting this fight after I got out of it. Just as an activist who had gotten away, but was pissed off at what had happened. I never thought I'd actually be able to go back and undo what had happened then. I mean, sure, it was a juvenile thing. It's sealed. But I would much rather have the computer show a sealed record of having been screwed over than a sealed record of admitted guilt. Because no one was interested in me or the rights I was asserting. They don't belong to mental patients. We are not full citizens. That is, until we are prepared to demand our rights as such, and to back that demand up. I will be sending the recording I have, the papers, all of the notes, witness statements, mostly Dad's admissions, to the pardon board, asking them to undo this, and to the governor. And I will be posing the question, is this acceptable due process in the state of Colorado? Are you prepared to stake your name on the thought that this was right. Because while you might think ignoring it is a politically safe choice, since after all your discretion in a matter of pardon is absolute. And I'm not asking for a pardon, I'm asking for a pardon based on a finding of innocence. You know, the kind of pardon that undoes a wrong instead of says, you're forgiven. Because, you know, I've done nothing to forgive. I stopped an abuser after I tried to make the lawful people do it for me, and they made it clear they didn't want to, weren't willing to, and didn't believe. And even then, I first communicated I wanted no part of conflict, and then I warned, and then I struck. And I suppose, on the other side of 10 years, I've just relearned that that was the right choice. Because with Dad, I tried to work with him. I tried to give him an opportunity to perhaps set this right without being destroyed. And I don't know the value of what I have on him because it was a long time ago. But I can prove the living shit out of what happened. And that should scare him.
We got 9 minutes. Nice.
Okay. Do you want to take a 5-minute break before you
That's
leave?
probably wise.